Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we are diving headfirst into one of the most incredible, high stakes, true stories from the ancient world. We're looking at the divided kingdom of ancient Judah. Now, this was a tiny nation caught in an absolute crossfire, fighting for its very survival against some of the most massive, ruthless empires in human history. It's this wild story packed with chaotic politics, desperate rebellions, brilliant engineering, and ultimately a staggering look at human depravity and redemption. Listen to this quote etched into a stone prism from thousands of years ago. I had Hezekiah, king of Jerusalem, trapped like a bird in a cage. Just let that sink in for a second. That immediately sets the stage for the life or death stakes of this era, doesn't it? This wasn't just political posturing. This was a brutal, terrifying conqueror completely relishing in the impending destruction of a rebellious king. So to see how we even got to that terrifying cage, let's just do a quick chronological flyover. The history of God's people during this time is essentially this slow, tragic collapse defined by three critical dates. In 931 BC, the United Kingdom splits in two. Then, in 722 BC, the northern kingdom of Israel is completely wiped out by the Assyrian Empire. And finally, the date we're marching toward today is 587 BC, which is when the southern kingdom of Judah finally falls to Babylon. All right, take a look at this geopolitical chessboard. You've got to picture tiny little Judah as a pawn entirely surrounded by massive violent superpowers. Up to the north and east, you've got the Assyrian war machine, which had already devoured the northern kingdom. Then you have Babylon, just looming on the horizon as the eventual conqueror. Down south, there's Egypt, always this wild card, and a super tempting yet dangerous military ally. And right above Judah, Syria is acting as this unpredictable, turbulent buffer zone. I mean, talk about a terrifying neighborhood. Section 1. A dynasty in chaos, the downward spiral. Look, when a tiny nation is under that much external pressure, it just breeds absolute political chaos internally. The leaders of Judah desperately compromise their alliances and, frankly, their souls, just to survive this downward spiral. I mean, just look at this incredibly fast-paced, bloody revolving door of leadership. King Ahaziah, assassinated by a guy named Jehu, who is cleaning house up north. In response to that, Ahaziah's mother, Queen Athaliah, launches a horrific 7-year reign of terror. It's a total purge to wipe out the entire Davidic royal line just to protect Baal worship. Then, a little boy named Joash gets hidden away by his nurse for 7 years. Just to survive, he eventually becomes king, but then he's assassinated too. And the whole thing culminates with King Ahaz, who gets so scared of his neighbors, he literally imports the design of a pagan Syrian altar right into the Lord's temple in Jerusalem. It is a complete and utter disaster. Section 2. The Chutzpah of Hezekiah, the Golden Boy. Okay, finally we get to hit the brakes on the madness. Enter King Hezekiah. Hezekiah is the one bright light in this incredibly dark era. He steps up and immediately begins sweeping religious reforms. In his very first month, he throws open the temple doors, cleans out the defilement, and he even crushes the ancient bronze serpent, an artifact from Moses' time that the people had horribly turned into an idol. Plus, he brings the whole nation back to observing the Passover. But here's the thing, alongside all that faithfulness, Hezekiah had what can only be described as absolute chutzpah. It's such a great word for brazen arrogance, right? The audacity to do something that seems totally unrealistic. Because Hezekiah, ruling this tiny, vulnerable little kingdom of Judah, decides he's going to stage a full-blown rebellion against the terrifying king of Assyria. It is a stunning, wildly audacious move. Section 3. The Assyrian Siege, a bird in a cage. So, as you might guess, that audacity invites an absolute nightmare. Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, decides he's going to march his massive, unstoppable army right toward Jerusalem to punish Hezekiah and just wipe Judah off the map once and for all. Now, invading armies coming from Mesopotamia almost always swung down the flat, easy-to-travel coastal plain. Sennacherib marches his forces down and parks his massive army at the heavily fortified city of Lachish. From Lachish, he has the absolute perfect staging ground to launch up into the hill country directly toward Jerusalem. The siege is imminent. So, what do you do when the world's biggest army is at your doorstep? Well, Hezekiah executes a brilliant, multi-pronged defense strategy. First and foremost, he gets his spiritual priorities straight. He goes straight to the temple to pray earnestly, and he consults the great prophet Isaiah. Second, he begins these massive public works, building formidable outer defense walls. And third, he commissions the digging of a hidden water tunnel. Let's talk about those defenses for a second. Think about the sheer size of the broad wall built on the western slope. By this time, Jerusalem had expanded massively, with refugees fleeing the Assyrian destruction of the north. So to protect them, Hezekiah had to build a new wall encircling their settlements. The prophet Isaiah actually rebukes the people over this because Hezekiah used a brutal form of eminent domain, literally tearing down citizens' houses so he could use the foundations and materials to construct this massive defensive barrier. But the real Achilles heel here was water. A besieged city without water falls in a matter of days. And the Gihon Spring actually sat entirely outside the main city walls. So Hezekiah's engineers designed an ingenious solution, a hidden underground tunnel to safely channel the water from the exposed spring directly inside the city walls to a protected pool. That way, the expanded population could access it without getting slaughtered by Assyrian arrows. And it is honestly staggering to realize the scale of this project. The tunnel they carved is a third of a mile long, straight through solid limestone bedrock. I find this detail absolutely fascinating. We actually have an artifact called the Siloam inscription that was found inside the tunnel. It vividly describes how two teams of workers wielding pickaxes started at opposite ends and miraculously met right in the middle. It remains an absolute engineering marvel of the ancient world. So, Hezekiah faithfully prepares, he prays, and God answers. The conclusion of this siege is just jaw-dropping. The biblical text tells us that the angel of the Lord went out and wiped out literally 185,000 Assyrian soldiers in their camp overnight. Sennacherib wakes up to a completely devastated army, breaks camp, and retreats all the way back to Nineveh, where he's actually eventually assassinated by his own sons. Jerusalem is miraculously saved. Section 4. The reign of Manasseh, the shocking reversal. Now, you'd think that would be the end of the story, right? A permanent return to peace and faithfulness. But history is rarely that simple. After Hezekiah dies, his son Manasseh takes the throne, and he pivots the narrative sharply, plunging the entire nation right back into pure, unadulterated horror. Get this. Manasseh took the throne when he was just 12 years old, and he ruled for an agonizing 55 years. I mean, think about that number. We feel the intense political fatigue of our modern 8-year presidential terms, right? Imagine 55 continuous years of the most hideously evil leadership imaginable, just slowly suffocating the nation. Let's soberly look at his resume. It is dark. He rebuilt the pagan high places his father had just destroyed. He actually put carved Asherah poles inside the Lord's temple. He engaged in sorcery and literally sacrificed his own son in the fire. The text says he shed so much innocent blood that it filled Jerusalem from end to end. An extra-biblical Jewish tradition strongly suggests he was the one who had the elderly prophet Isaiah martyred by having him sawn in two. Manasseh is unequivocally the worst king in Judah's history. Section 5. A shocking redemption. So eventually, Manasseh's evil actually catches up with him. That looming superpower, Assyria, returns. Their commanders capture Manasseh, and the text here is so graphic, they put a hook in his nose, bind him in heavy bronze shackles, and literally drag him away as a prisoner to Babylon. The proud, wicked king is utterly broken. But then, we get what I think is one of the single most shocking reversals in the entire historical text. In his deep, agonizing distress in Babylon, this man, the murderer, the idolater, the worst king in history, he humbles himself greatly. He cries out and prays to the God of his fathers, and miraculously, God is moved by his entreaty, listens to his plea, forgives him, and actually restores him to Jerusalem. It's an outcome that totally challenges everything we think we know about justice and grace. It really forces us to ask, if a leader who filled a city with innocent blood, who sacrificed his own child, who lived in utter rebellion for decades, if the absolute worst king in history can humble himself and find total forgiveness, is anyone ever truly too far gone? It's a powerful reminder that history isn't just about empires and dates. It's about the relentless, totally unpredictable reach of grace. Something to chew on long after this explainer is over. Thanks so much for joining me.